Pokemon Legends Arceus is my favorite main series Pokemon game, and I've been playing Pokemon since Red and Blue first released in the United States. The feeling of adventure you have as you sneak up on Pokemon to catch them effectively, the risk of getting absolutely trounced by a pissed-off wild Pokemon, and the excitement of hearing the sound effect that denotes a shiny Pokemon spawn as you're just walking along on a totally unrelated task, all made Legends Arceus stand out from the traditional turn-based Pokemon RPGs. When Pokemon Legends ZA was announced, I was understandably stoked for it. There's a lot about Legends ZA that disappointed me, but there's just as much that I loved about it. It's definitely a divisive game, but there's still a solid and worthwhile Pokemon experience here. Legends ZA is a direct sequel to Pokemon X and Y, taking place in Lumiose City 5 years after the events of the Generation 6 3DS games. You play as a teenager of some age, who is traveling to Lumiose for a vacation. You find yourself accosted by an overly extroverted girl named Tawny, with a video camera who drags you into helping to film a promotional video for her hotel, Hotel Z. You quickly realize, though, that a random Pancham has stolen your bag, so you and Tawny chase after it to discover that it belonged to a couple of random trainers. Surprisingly, the Pancham wasn't trying to rob you per se, it just really likes to carry stuff. Anyway, Tawny lets you use one of the 3 Pokemon she has with her, Chikorita, Tepig, or Totodile, and y'all battle the trainers. That's how you pick your starter and get your tutorial for the game's battle mechanics. To mention a minor gripe, let's consider the visuals for a minute. That's your first impression. On Switch 2, the game runs really well, but it legit kinda looks like a Wii U game. Now, I'm a retro gamer, so I don't need the newest, flashiest visuals to enjoy a game. But we had some gorgeous games on Switch, and Switch 2 is capable of a lot more. Why does the Switch 2 version of Legends ZA still look like an upscaled 3DS game with some moderately decent HD textures? Game Freak clearly isn't incapable of making 3D games with visuals that are impressive. The upcoming Beast of Reincarnation proves that. And Switch 2 is very capable of pretty decent visuals even by modern standards. Yakuza 0 and Cyberpunk 2077 prove that. So why does Game Freak keep making Pokemon games that look like baby's first HD? I know that's a really minor complaint, but it is bugging me now that we're getting native Switch 2 versions that still look at least a generation behind. Now, getting back to the battle, let's talk about those mechanics, because that is probably my least favorite part of the game. Unlike the previous over 3 dozen main series games, the battles are not turn-based. They're all real-time. When you send a Pokemon out into battle, you run around the field and manually target an opposing Pokemon. This is done by locking on with holding ZL. And you use the 4 face buttons, A, B, X, and Y, to choose which of your Pokemon's attacks to use. Because it's real-time and not turn-based, PP for each move is gone and replaced with a cooldown timer. Stronger moves that previously had low PP now have a longer cooldown timer. From a stat perspective, nothing has really changed. Speed obviously doesn't determine who goes first since there are no turns, but it does determine how quickly your Pokemon can use a move after selecting it, so it's still a vitally important stat. Similar to my complaints about Final Fantasy IV's shift to the active time battle system instead of traditional turn-based fights, I don't care for this real-time system. It works perfectly fine, and it didn't take me long to get used to it, so it's not bad. I'm just a turn-based purist. I prefer turn-based combat. I like being able to think through my moves and overall strategy, so while this may make the game a lot more engaging for some players, it's just not for me. The next big thing, something else I don't really care for, is the setting. The entire game takes place completely inside Lumiose City. There are no routes between towns, no true caves aside from the city's sewers, and most of the wild Pokemon are only in set wild areas. Personally, I much prefer the way Legends Arceus did it, with different areas that were full of wild Pokemon throughout the entire map. These wild areas are okay, there's nothing wrong with them. And there's definitely still a distinction between Pokemon that spawn in grass, near water, on rooftops, etc. But it's just not as exciting to me as having a huge map to explore for wild Pokemon hiding in random nooks and crannies. That said, the number of wild areas, and thus the number of Pokemon available to catch, does steadily expand as you progress through the game's main missions, so it's not as limited as I'd initially feared. Like with the change to real-time battle mechanics, it's not that Game Freak did anything wrong with the game's design here, it's just a change that I personally don't care for. My single biggest disappointment with the game, outside of changes to mechanics, is the lack of any new Pokemon or regional forms. There are something like 24 new Mega Evolutions, and while I don't consider it new, per se, since it was seen in-game and was in the code for X and Y and just never had an event for it released, Eternal Floette is finally obtainable for the first time in this game. Legends Arceus, however, had a few new forms for older Pokemon, Arcanine and Electrode, for example. And for the starters in Legends Arceus, each one's final evolution had a new regional form, plus the legendary Pokemon Palkia and Dialga got new forms. The fact that nothing got a truly new form in Legends ZA really disappointed me. I definitely enjoyed catching the Pokemon that were here, and I fully admit that this could change with the DLC or the upcoming update to enable Pokemon Home connectivity next year. It seems odd to me that Alolan forms are supported, only available through NPC trades, but still. But as far as I'm aware, there's no data in the game for Cleaver, despite Scyther and Scizor both being in the game. I know most players won't be super bothered by the lack of new Pokemon, but for a lot of hardcore Pokemon players like me, it's a bummer. My favorite thing about any new Pokemon game is having new Pokemon or new forms to hunt so that I can fill in the new spaces in my living decks in Pokemon Home. Other than the Eternal Flower form for Floette, I didn't get any of that with Legends ZA. Now that I've laid out all of my many complaints with the game, let's get to some of the things that I think the game did very right. I may not like that the game is totally within Lumio City, but the city does feel alive in a way that it didn't in X and Y. There are NPCs everywhere, and there are over 10 side quests in the game to complete, and that's in addition to the nearly 4 main quests. On top of all that, there's a ton of research tasks to complete that work you towards some really good rewards, including the Shiny Charm once you hit the maximum research rank of 50. I've done everything so far except finish one last research task, win 1,000 battles, and that took me about 45 hours so far. Not once in those 45 hours was I bored. In fact, I found myself getting more engaged in the game the longer that I played. I went into Pokemon Legends ZA expecting to be disappointed and underwhelmed. And while there was definitely some disappointment that I felt with certain aspects of the game, I had a lot more fun with it than I expected to, and I'm still having fun with it. There are some Mega Stones that are locked behind achieving a certain rank in online ranked battles during a specific season, and that's a big negative for some people, since they are time-locked and not otherwise available in-game. But personally, I think it's cool, because that actually gives you a reason to do the online ranked battles instead of just get some stuff that's also obtainable in the main game. And it's really actually pretty easy to get that minimum rank. It only took me 5 battles over the span of about half an hour to go from rank Z to rank K, which is when you unlock Greninja's Mega Stone. So it's really not the sweaty task that I first expected when I saw ranked battles. All in all, Pokemon Legends ZA, while definitely my least favorite main series Pokemon game, does continue the series' signature addictive monster-catching gameplay, and it also continues Game Freak's recent attempts to shake up the series to address the complaints that every game is the same. I don't like all of the changes that they've made to this or some of the other recent games. The lack of online battles in Legends Arceus, and the really crappy attempt at pseudo-real-time battles in the Scarlet and Violet raids were major points of contention for me in those games. But even when I don't think it lands well, I do applaud Game Freak for trying something new with the series. And some of the changes, like the changes to the Pokemon catching mechanics in the 2 Legends game, were a very welcome change to me. All in all, this was destined to be a very divisive game for longtime fans, but I had a good time with it, and I encourage all Pokemon fans to pick this one up. Just don't expect it to live up to Legends Arceus or Pokemon X and Y. My rating for Pokemon Legends ZA on Switch and Switch 2 is a B.